Welcome to another episode of Tanstwocents podcast. Today's episode is titled Fractional COO, the executive role built for uncertain times with Rob Osuch. I'm your host, Tanwilson, and today with us is my friend and longtime colleague, Rob Osuch. He's a fractional COO and industry leader who will share how this model is shaping the future of leadership in GovCon and in industry in general. Rob, thanks so much for joining us here today and say hello to our listeners, the Intellectuals, and tell them a little bit about yourself.
Well, hello, Intellectuals, and it's great to be on with you, Ton, and being on this GovCon podcast journey that you've been sharing tremendous insights, and I'm happy to be participating in today's event. A little bit about me. I might make it a little winded only because I think it's relevant to the topic. I got my degree from Virginia Tech in management science decision support systems. And I find that that degree was probably 30 years premature to where we are today, because when I look at a COO role, I think one of the key foundations for that role is establishing a decision support system where we learned about predictive analytics, artificial intelligence, knowledge management, modeling and simulations. It was all the things that are very relevant today, because I'm sure AI will probably come up in our conversation. And now that the compute power is there today in our IT infrastructure, we're able to take advantage of AI, particularly in the office of the COO, to help drive
Mhm.
transformational change and help modernize organizations. So I had a good foundation at Virginia Tech and decision support systems, and then I got started over at Perot Systems. If everybody remembers Ross Perot, he was one of
Yes.
the early IT system
Yeah.
integrator founders, and I learned how to build really robust, large billing and accounting systems for tens of thousands of people, and understanding the importance of good enterprise architecture. So I've worked with some of the best enterprise architects at that time. So another key component that we're going to talk about in terms of a COO is having like systems level thinking in terms of
Mhm.
how you solution and you orient and you operate an organization to scale it to grow. And I really feel like that foundation at Pro Systems sort of set the stage on how to execute on a strategy, which was great. And then from there, I moved over into the management consulting space where I helped set up enterprise PMOs. And now they're becoming the rise of the XMO or the transformation office. Again,
Yeah.
another key component, another key pillar for scaling operations is having a good project management office to translate that strategy and get it executed across all aspects of your business. Running large programs for like Fannie Mae's restatement, or helping with merger post-merger acquisitions for telecom companies and satellite companies and things like that. So you learn a lot working with different shared service leaders in that role, whether you're in finance or IT or go to market. And so from there, I moved into more traditional management consulting the last 10 to 15 years, consulting with shared service leaders in Fortune 500 companies, where you learn a lot of interesting patterns around how people execute across all these different roles, whether you're a CHRO that's charged with change management and the people side of the business, or you're in technology as a CIO, like how are we going to innovate and drive adoption of emerging tech, cloud first, and now we're in the age of the
Mhm.
AI, to the go to market functions that have to modernize the selling system and how they communicate value to your customers. And I feel like that kind of foundation is really critical if you're looking to bring in a CEO that has that holistic understanding of how business is architected.
Yeah. I so appreciate you taking the time to lay that out because I think in our conversation here today, context, experience, and the diversity of type of experience is so critical. And I think that's where it separates those who are really successful to those who are kind of floundering in this space. And I love the fact that your background and where you came from an educational perspective. Don't you feel like we were born a few decades too late? That man, if I only had half the tools that my son Henry has right now, when I was back in school or when I was younger, I think I probably would have conquered the world by now. But it's such an exciting time, and I think it's a great opportunity for us to have this type of discussion, which is the kind of discussion I've been wanting to have as part of our C-suite. So I'm going to I think our intellectuals are really going to enjoy hearing a lot of your commercial industry cross domain type of experience and knowledge to kind of give some of these organizations a little bit better perspective than just the GovCon perspective, which I think is really key because a lot of companies are moving from the private sector into the government sector and
Yep.
vice versa. There's a mass exodus also too, from public sector into the private sector. So this is a very timely conversation. So thank you for that background. But seriously though, before
Yeah. Can
we
I?
kind of,
If I'm
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Ton. But you had me at hello there because I I'm coming from a native woman-owned small business oxygen experience, and we've done all commercial work, and we've looked at and put our toe in the water for the GovCon market. It's been an interesting time the last 2 years, and maybe not the right entry point. But I think where I've sort of cut my teeth on is I've worked in the commercial sector, I've worked for large nonprofits, and I've been in the public sector working and partnering with you. But there's lots to learn across each of those different segments on how to operate and execute.
Yeah, exactly. But before we jump in too far into the details and different segments that we have here today, I want to ask, like, what's one surprising skill or hobby that you've kind of picked up recently that helps you to kind of manage the stress? Because we're all facing it right now. Some of us, like myself, are in denial. But how do you cope with that? What have you picked up?
I love that question, actually, and it's not something necessarily recent, but I'm a big college football fan, and it's been
Yeah,
painful for us Hokies. But one thing
so
that's kind of
painful.
yeah, it's been very painful. But one thing that's interesting about college football that is very recent is how the NIL game, name, image, likeness, is changing the dynamics and the compensation for players. And now you're coming up with more of an NFL like model. So it's very interesting to see the comparables with college football to the GovCon market in this way that the private equity firms are starting to come in. And that's
Mm,
something that probably better than I, having been
yeah.
out of the public sector a little bit, is now the PE firms have come in from when I was in the public sector, and now they're trying to make an entrance into college football. So I find that to be incredibly fascinating, highly disruptive. I don't love it as a fan, but I find it very interesting from a clinical or consulting standpoint.
Yeah.
And then secondly, I just walk every day. I try to make that a very core part of my routine, get morning light in the morning. If anyone's watched Andrew Huberman's podcast on health, it's great to have a set routine where you get that sunlight and you get your walk and you get your thinking in. That's a great stress reliever for me.
Yeah, I uh, binge watch trash TV as my way of kind of unplugging. So, hey, you do you. Yeah.
I've watched The Bachelor. I own that. So I do a little binge watching myself.
Oh, closet bachelor watcher.
I am.
Okay.
I just went public with my
There you
bachelor.
go. You heard it here on Tanstwocents.
Right.
But all right. So, in all seriousness, let's kick off our conversation here with our first segment. I kind of want to set the stage a little bit about why does a fractional COO or COO in general matter now in this type of environment? And so, I think that the COO role is it's basically the operating engine of any company organization. As budgets tightens and the volatility grows, more companies are kind of turning to a fractional leadership role, whether it's a fractional COO, CFO, CGO, you name it, the entire C-suite. But our conversation here today, I want you to explain to me, Rob, like, what is a fractional COO, and why is it so relevant in today's market?
Yeah, I love that question because you're right. The fractional model is becoming more prominent because to me, it's all part of executing a growth strategy. And when I look at a fractional COO specifically, it's that scaling mechanism of you're trying to grow, and the CEO is it's still young in the company. You're small. The CEO to me still needs to be the face of the business, and it's such a high pressure role because typically you own the company as an owner and you have to operate the company. So bringing in a strategic operator to help offload some of that operational thinking, so you can focus on your go to market presence and your branding and what your product and service strategy is going to be, which is incredibly important because our markets are incredibly dynamic. But to me, it's an opportunity to say, okay, I'm ready to grow to that next stage, and I can bring in an experienced operator to come in to set up my operating structure. And I have an operating model construct that I use that's focused around people, process, and technology in its simplest form. But it's an integrating function. Bringing in someone that has a diverse background, like someone like myself that comes from a consulting background, seen lots of different patterns on how to operate, you understand the importance of setting up a rhythm of business to get you to that scaling point and getting the right type of collaboration and the right type of cadence with your management team and getting that in place as you start to develop and roll out your strategy. So that's, to me, that's like a good starting point for a fractional COO to come in, is establish that rhythm of business or establish that cadence as you're starting to build out and scale certain parts of your operation.
Yeah, I think that's really important because, especially at the beginning of a company's journey, cadence can be a little erratic. And so you do need to kind of, if we were to talk about, if we were to use the analogy like, steering a ship, right? Like your COO is the person who is really kind of making sure that we stay focused on what we need to stay focused on so that all the other people can kind of manage and be, thought leaders or the visionaries or those who are doing business development. And so I think it is very challenging, though, for a small organization when you're resource strapped, financially strapped, and maybe that's, a lot of the reasons why people don't explore looking at a COO earlier on because they just can't afford to
That's right.
have someone fill that role.
Yeah.
So
And the other
fractional
thing that,
support is the way to do it too. It's one option.
yeah, yeah, so I like that. I like where you're going with that, Ton. And the one thing that we'll probably talk about again as we continue this conversation is when I've talked to, like, we use fractional CHROs and fractional CFOs, and there's myself included. You're often getting someone who's highly seasoned on
Mhm.
top of that, that has a myriad of a background, has done a lot, has a lot of depth, and they're at a point where they're looking to have multiple clients or a different type of job in the stage of life that they're in. So you're getting somebody that is heavily seasoned traditionally and has worked with lots of different companies and have seen how different companies operate and can probably get you at least show you the scar tissue of making the wrong decision, which is actually incredibly important to get that kind of counsel
Yeah.
from people that you can't quite put a price tag on, the cost of indecision or cost of making the wrong decision, and bringing in that fractional leadership at a bare minimum will give you sort of that sounding board that you need to help make better informed decisions, if that makes sense. And I do think that's a key pillar of a CFO or a COO type of role, is to help provide information to make the right decisions for the business.
Yeah. And I so appreciate the fact that when you do hire a fractional C-suite executive, is that they are bringing in a lot of not only like history and experience, but they have the battle scars, right? They have had setbacks. And I enjoy hearing about some of the setbacks and the challenges, which is probably an unpopular thing for all of us to kind of talk about or to, express because everybody wants to be perfect and everybody wants to be successful.
Yeah.
But there's so much to be learned by hearing stories and by learning from and presenting it yourself as an example of when you made the wrong decision about, like you said, indecision sometimes can be can be your downfall. A rash and quick decision could potentially be the wrong decision at that time. So there's, like no right or wrong method to it. It just kind of depends on that person needs to kind of meet you at where you are at that stage, right? So one COO and one organization, you can't say, hey, come and do the same thing for us. You can't translate that into, like what you did here, you're going to do here because you're a different company, you have different challenges, and so there's so many other factors that kind of impact all of that.
Yeah, I love that, Ton. So as we're talking here, I have this sort of interesting role that I've been in, helping run be a COO in a small consulting business where I actually consult and advise other shared service leaders, including COOs at much larger companies. So I have to practice what I preach.
Yeah.
And what I love about being a consultant and being in a fractional role, in which you're going to get, is somebody that's going to be a little bit more clinical as well. They're not going to be as helping. They're not going to be part of the emotion that actually
Yeah.
happens inside of a company. And you really need somebody that's got that um, unflappableness. They can look at something, like I said, clinically is the best way I can describe it, without having emotion into this insight or the feedback you're providing. And that can be very invaluable in a startup environment, or you're in a heavy growth stage where there's lots of emotion. And in your individual silos, whether it's the go-to-market team and sales and marketing or the client delivery team, having a sound, reasoned voice in the room is really critical to help drive consensus and collaboration across those teams.
Yeah, no, exactly. And we will kind of peel back that onion here a little bit too, because that's something that I think is so critical, and that's the reason why I love consulting so much too. Is the
Yes.
value and the impact that you can kind of have on an organization coming in. So let's move to the second segment here, which is consulting. On the edge here, this has been quite a bit of a market shift, but the commercial consulting has kind of shifted really dramatically from steady contracts to volatility, short term projects. And so, how can a fractional COO help companies kind of navigate when revenue is kind of unpredictable and clients change direction, they change their minds, and sometimes they do it literally overnight for no apparent reason?
Yeah, this is a fun question, and one where I myself have lost many sleepless nights. So I'll probably have some randomized thoughts as we talk through this a little bit. The first thing that comes to mind, particularly if you're a consulting oriented business, is making sure you have an adaptable staffing model. At the core part of like your operating structure, building out a scalable, dynamic staffing model where you're using a mix of full-time employees. You could be using temporary or hourly W-2s. You could have subcontractors, and actually maintaining a cadence, a strong connection to that bench or to that staffing model is really critical, so that you can scale up or down depending upon the dynamics of the environment you're in, and making sure that you've got the right set of skills and capabilities in that bench to allow you to pivot or move depending upon the change in the dynamics. So we spent a lot of time building out, even at a small company like we had like two or three different staffing agencies we used for the type of talent we bring in. That was part-time talent, is like to help do content production and things like that. So we had a lot of flexibility where we could quickly scale if we got lots of project work that came in, and we cultivated the bench and the relationships with our contractors, and they knew the type of people that we needed to bring in versus our talent acquisition team. That what is the profile that we really need to bring in for key critical roles that are going to be part of that long-term strategy you have. But I go back to like maintaining and really developing that resource bench is really critical. That's one thing that comes to mind. The other thing that comes to mind is making sure that your go-to-market and your customer delivery teams are integrated in terms of the methodology or process that you have from the times you engage with your customer, whether it's going through a formal proposal process or any kind of sales process to client delivery. We always like to have some of our senior delivery leaders involved in the sales conversations themselves,
Oh,
uh,
absolutely. Yeah.
which lends a lot of credibility because clients want to hear. I've been in a
Mhm.
lot of sales calls myself as a COO and being a thought leader as being a in the throes of transformation. And when I talk to leaders, whether you're a CFO or head of marketing or sales enablement or whatever, they want to know about the scar tissue, the issues that you've come across. They want to know the wins and the losses. And it's good to hear that from people in the field, your senior leaders in the field, your
Mhm.
practice leaders in the field. Conversely, what we did is we often had our sales and marketing people, and I would advise this in the top level companies as well. They've got to be involved in the delivery side of the business. Are we capturing the wins correctly? And is the marketing team getting the right context for the case study or the project and the outcomes that are driven? I mean, these are like simple steps that I continuously see where there isn't cross pollination that's happening across the go to market teams and the delivery teams, which actually gives you some ability to flex because there's been many times where we've been in an RFP or a sales meeting with a client and there is a specific need and they completely change direction in the conversation on where they want to focus. And we're seeing a lot of that these days is I think the clients are uncertain or don't have confidence or are risk averse about what it is that they want. And you need to have position flexibility on those calls to be able to pivot with them and guide them to a solution. And having that holistic, integrated approach between go to market and delivery is critical.
Yeah, and I think that's so critical if we were to translate this into the GovCon space, right? This is
Yeah.
really part of where I see and the really successful companies from those who are kind of struggling is that baton pass from BD to capture to proposals. And a lot of times it's not a smooth transition or a smooth pass. It's pretty much, I'm going to throw you the baton. You need to catch it and run with it. And by the way, don't drop it. Otherwise, I'm going to come back at you and blame
That's
you for
right.
it. Right. But meanwhile, BD is like, here, peace out. I'm going to go chase the next shiny object. Capture sitting there like, what am I supposed to do with this? I got no context. I don't see what you're seeing. And so you're so right. If you integrate all of the players, the different stakeholders early on, and actually have a substantive type of conversations. And I think this is where there has been such an incredible breakdown in communications within certain organizations is and this could be because of the pandemic, but I think it kind of actually was systemic before the pandemic, is we have a very singular channel type of I communicate, you receive, you communicate back.
Yep.
There's so it's kind of like a circular type of thing, but there's no concurrent or simultaneous kind of conversation. And so I think we've got this entire generation and this entire culture right now where if you were to be the one descending voice in a conversation, no one wants to be that person. But that sometimes is that one person or that one question that is so critical that
Right.
actually starts to not stir the pot, but it kind of opens up Pandora's box. And sometimes you have to open up Pandora's box to kind of get to the real goodness of the innovation, the solution, um, the the innovative strategy that you kind of need. But you can't do that if you don't have the right people at the table. And sometimes we're a little reluctant about having certain people at the table because we just don't want to hear it. So it's kind of a catch 22, isn't it? Like,
It is totally a catch 22. And you're absolutely right because we see it in ourselves and with the clients that I was dealing with, both on a mid-sized growth PE back firms and high, Fortune 500 clients. The COVID pandemic was a big disruptor because not everybody was ready, professionally mature enough. I hate to say that to be in a remote environment and be available and know how to collaborate because the collaboration is definitely harder when you're in a remote setting. And it goes back to when I let off with part of our earlier discussion is like setting up that good rhythm of business tied into your methodology and approach that has that integration between your go to market and delivery teams. That rhythm of business that you're establishing, it's
yeah,
cultural. It's like the timing of certain meetings and events, who's there, who's participating, establishing a culture of collaboration and participation at the right times. Sometimes you need some discipline and structure from an execution standpoint. But companies have really struggled to find that right mix as we're coming back into more of a hybrid in work environment of how do we operate and work together and collaborate
hmm,
together because all that's about how do we adapt to the speed of our customers because our customers are going to continuously change and that pace of change, I mean, it's kind of a everyone talks about the pace of change being more accelerated, but it's totally true. So
yeah.
we've got to work faster than the pace of our customers and be willing to adapt, and that's a key variable to that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I came up with another topic for another podcast episode, which is really kind of talking about the generational divide and how the
Oh yeah.
different generations like to operate and to work, because you have to take that into account too. You've got pandemic professionals that kind of graduated college and came up through the pandemic. We have this technology divide. We've got the Gen Xers like myself who are, we're like cockroaches. We'll be here till, till end of days. We're not going anywhere. And then we've got the baby boomers who are kind of, leaving and exiting the workforce. So there's so many different types of working personalities, in addition to some of the new technology and post-pandemic type of challenges that we're facing in this whole role, which really makes the role of a COO even more important. So again, we could belabor this whole conversation for the rest of the time, but I kind of want to move on to our next topic, which is like from proposal to performance, which is what I operate and talk about all the time, and why the COO spot is kind of like that sweet spot in this whole process. So, you know this because we met when you were my client in the middle of a proposal. I think it was Department of State, which,
It
God
it
bless
was. I was
them.
a solutions architect. That was one of the roles I played. I remember that
Yes,
very.
right? And so proposals literally live or die in on operational credibility. And so I think fractional COOs, can help with like aligning pricing models with delivery reality, ensuring BD stories are executable, balancing this flashy BD strategy with feasibility on execution and ops, designing the handoff from win to delivery. There's so many moving parts that COO is sitting in this, in this process, in this environment. So, Rob, can you share an example of when operational foresight made a difference in a bid pursuit? And I know you probably have many.
I do, but I'm going to probably summarize in a couple of key things that has just popped in my head as you're talking here, Ton, that are born about from that experience, that scar tissue of leading many proposal efforts and being on the flip side. So I've been on the luxury of being on the front end of helping to drive proposal efforts in a multitude of roles, whether it's solutioning or sales, and then having to deliver on the back end. A couple of things that come to my mind sitting in my role as COO coming into a young company is having the importance of having a good project management information system.
Mm,
You can call it professional service automation tools, PSA tools. Those are invaluable. I mean, it's table stakes to get your time cards in so you can get paid. And I know there's certain requirements of
yeah.
the federal government on certain contracts, but it's what we did at Oxygen, which was really, really helpful in our proposal development efforts, is we had captured time around all the deliverables and the activities so that when we got new opportunities, our packaging and our pricing was much more accurate and much more available to the go-to-market teams to help properly price some of the firm fixed price efforts that we were going after. Like we went after a lot of firm fixed price work, which can be very challenging to bid on when you're doing specific
Yeah.
um, product based type of work or content based type of work. So that's one thing that comes to my mind most prominently. The other thing is like I talked earlier about having a good sound methodology that you follow when you're doing your proposal work, and mixing that with the project management background that I have. I'm a sort of a semi-retired PMP certified project manager building out PMOs. You need really strong discipline on a proposal effort. And Ton, you're the best at this that I've ever come across to keep everybody on point. What are the key milestones? What are the key interdependencies? These proposal efforts, particularly they're in the 50 to $100 million plus, there's a lot of complexity there. It's a full-blown project managing teams as big as this probably better than I, 10, 20, 30, 40 plus people, multiple teaming partners. It requires a mini PMO to pull
In a
that
very
off
condensed period of time, right? It's not
in a
like I've
very
got,
condensed period of time. Right. And I remember like, the old Shipley, pink, pink, red, whatever. It's probably changed since I've been in the government space. But if you don't have a strong COO or strong proposal leader, someone that's got that good structure to keep everybody on point to make sure that you're able to, because, if you miss the deadline, you're dead. There's some flexibility in the commercial space where you have the ability to shape your proposals a little bit more in a little less non-competitive environment. But the thing I think about is having that strong discipline on the team to make sure you're getting a sound work product out the door. So those are the two things that come to mind.
Yeah, and you're right. It's we do follow a methodology, and sometimes the challenge to that is knowing when to modify that methodology. And
Yes,
so there's repeatable processes so that you're following either an agile ISO type of approach to it. But I think this is where we've talked a lot about failures and experience. This is really one of the places too where having someone who has some battle scars, who has seen a number of different scenarios, can kind of come in and be that chess master. Because to me, the
yep,
reason why I love capture and proposal so much is it's like a brand new chess game
it
every
is.
single time. And so, you know who your pawns are, you know all the different players on the board, but how you move them has to vary each time depending upon what, your opponent does. And so there are some very robotic um, like professionals that I know that are like, no, they're very rigid. They will, I'll be damned of what the board says, right? I'm going to do this because it should work this way, or and then they're so surprised when it doesn't, like kind of like go their way. And I'm like, well, I kind of saw two chess pieces ahead of you on that one, but that's because you and I have kind of seen it all. And I think this is a really good opportunity for us to kind of infuse a little bit of technology AI conversation and kind of I'm going to throw that little piece of red meat here in the middle of this conversation. But
That red meat. Yep.
right, right. It's like I can't have a podcast episode without me bringing up AI, ML, or some type of like leading edge technology because that's where everybody wants to go because we want to do everything quicker, faster, cheaper.
Yeah.
Again, those are three things that are not new. Those are not new needs, right? That any company has. But now you actually have a technology that can help you do that with some level of, with some level of confidence, super professional. But you need a really skilled person to raise the bullshit flag because you're going to get a lot of
Yep.
hallucinations. You're going to get a lot of, like AI is a kiss ass. Like I just did another podcast where, yeah, we talked about it and it's like, it always wants to tell you what you want to hear. You are always the smartest person in the room when it comes to AI, right? But no, I want you to challenge me a little bit more. And so this is, I think, some of the challenges that we have in this industry and at this time in our in society that we need someone in the COO's role to be able to kind of see a couple chess pieces ahead.
I love everything you said there because the one thing you're bringing up, even in the age of artificial intelligence, before that it was cloud computing. It was cloud this, cloud that,
It's
SaaS this,
always
SaaS this.
something. Yeah.
There, and I got this working with Oxygen, which is a people focused consultancy. And working with that team has been amazing because there's a human element involved here. And as the COO, or even as the proposal program manager, or setting up a proposal shop, as you said, you're going to be working with different personalities on every major proposal effort. Not the same set of people and the same set of capabilities are going to be present. So you need to quickly assess the capabilities of the team that you're working with, understand how to drive cohesion across that team very quickly to know the strengths and weaknesses and how people can complement each other. That human element is very critical to execution. It's one thing to have it drawn on paper. I mean, a methodology sounds great. And I talk about process and methodology. I'm an old
Yeah.
methodology geek myself. And you have to apply that methodology uniquely to every proposal effort. It's going to be different. The tool set you're going to use is different. And AI is absolutely critical, but not everybody on the team is going to have the same level of proficiency in AI as the other members of the team, or they may use it differently depending upon their role. If you're in a creative role, you're going to use it in one way. If you're in a technical role, you're going to use it a different way. And when your proposal comes together, you know this better than I, Ton, it's got to be written in one voice.
Yeah.
So all these tools are fantastic. They're great productivity drivers because at its core, Auction was a content creation engine. We created sales enablement and learning solutions for large companies, and there's great promise in using those tools. However, there's still a human element involved in the orchestration of all the proposal efforts, and even in the execution of the work.
Yeah, exactly. So you're never going to get rid of the human. So, which is, I think we need a T-shirt. AI, never going to get rid of the human.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. Anyways, no, good points, and I think this leads us really nicely into our next segment, which is we're going to talk a little bit more about federal contracting and where fractional. I think this is kind of where a fractional COO really will shine. Is that the federal work offers. It used to offer a lot of stability. It's multi-year stability, but it requires a lot of operational discipline. And organizations like DHS, ICE, CBP, they're moving into faster types of acquisitions and oral presentations. So, how can a fractional COO kind of help small and mid-tier companies compete in like this new environment? And again, this is just a fraction of the organizations within the government that's kind of moving towards this. And so the government is moving towards a number of different. So I don't want to say that DHS, ICE, and CBP are the only ones out there who use this type of acquisition model, but that's just an example. So, Rob, in your mind, how can a professional CFO help?
Well, when I think of a COO, it's a translation layer from the what to the how. And one of the things that, from my experience, both in creating proposals and reviewing and driving proposal efforts, is clients want to learn about the how. And the how can be really hard, whether it's in oral presentations or written format. So, depending upon the size of the solution being proposed, I think one aspect of as a SME, a COO SME can offer is to make sure that the how is covered as part of your approach, and that's clearly understood. Particularly in the age of AI, and we're in the early curve of adoption and knowing how to use it and when to use it and what's the sound right business case for using it. It's so early that companies are thirsty to understand how people are using it and implementing. So you got to make sure that there's strong case studies. You got to make sure that the ROI or the value proposition is really strong within those case studies. I think the COO can bring in that kind of discipline to make sure that aspect of the proposal is covered. Well, also, as we talked about, the other things we've talked about foundationally is making sure you've got sound collaboration and a sound process for delivering the work. But the emphasis on how just comes out to me in that question, because that's the thing I was seeing with shared service leaders in the Fortune 500 on the commercial side is that they're thirsty to know, like, how are you doing this? And what are you experiencing? Everything's so new to us. And they're really struggling with that.
Yeah. Um, I love how you use the translating the how, like the why into the how, and I think that we kind of skip that a little bit. And the reason why I love the oral presentation mode is it really kind of is a good demonstration and a good way for you to be able to convey that. And so I think a lot of companies rely on like boilerplates and reuse, and they're trying to like remodify a solution from someone else. And yes, I think in some service areas like help desk and certain admin type of contracts, that's fine. But some of the new contracting requirements and the new programs that the government is buying really doesn't fit that boilerplate type of approach. And so you do need to kind of have someone who really kind of understands this future state type of environment to operationally speaking, how do we do this and how do we integrate and bring in the solutions architect, the chief technology officers, and the right people in order to kind of like make that happen. So again, this is a very integrated team approach to solving some pretty complex problems.
Ton, you said something there that kind of it really resonated with me, and that is you said the future state. I'm a transformation geek by trade. I'm working with shared service leaders on all the time on how to modernize their organizations. And I can't tell you whether you're a CFO, CHRO, CTO, people can't articulate what that end state needs to look like. They really struggle
Yeah.
with that. And I've asked them like, "Hey, we're going through a transformation," and they have this great talk track. I'm like, "Well, what's the end state?" I do think a good component of a good COO or any C-level leader is being a futurist. What I like about it embedded as part of the COO role is they're tasked with getting you to that end state. Like I've been trained from the early days of Pro Systems to today of like, okay, I want to understand that end state. If it's the client or within our own domain, I'm going to get us on the path of how to get there through the operating model construct that I use or some of the delivery frameworks that I use. Having a little bit of a futurist in your COO is a very good thing because they have to understand what's that end state in the client and making sure that we have a compelling message and a set of deliverables and examples to show people on how it's done.
It's interesting that you put that in the COO position because I think, traditional speaking, or at least it's my assumption and maybe my misunderstanding of the position, is that a COO is a very like in the present now type of a seat. But I can definitely appreciate and see why having a very visionary COO would be an incredible quality to have. Because, some companies, let's just be honest, some companies are just very happy with status quo, with the here and now.
Yep.
That's where they want to be, that's their comfort zone, and that's fine. But with PE money, VC money, with like this, huge, push for increasing your ROI, increasing your profitability, having someone who is a good operations person who understands where all the bodies are buried within the organization will know where and how to move that body, that whole organization forward in a really successful, profitable kind of way. So um, that's a mic drop moment there. Like
Well, we can't live in the now anymore. The PE pressures alone and the customer pressures and the changes in the customers. I mean,
yeah,
the one thing you're talking about here that's been constant is change that requires an adaptive way of operating. And I do think having a futurist operator, strategic operator that understands what the strategy is going to be and can help get you there, but it can also adjust. Because the one thing that's pretty constant is we're going to have to constantly adjust because we're figuring that the whole AI thing is so disruptive. I think people are really underestimating the amount of change management that is needed in
yeah,
terms of like the skilling and the roles of people dramatically potentially changing more so than any other technology that we've had. And I've lived through it from mainframe, client server to web to cloud. But the artificial intelligence thing is changing the knowledge worker game. And so operators have to be able to adjust and have flexibility in their operating model to continuously execute changes in the strategy. To me, the strategy is going to continuously change for companies, the growth strategies. And so you have to be able to adapt to that.
yeah, exactly. And not only are organizations challenged with having internal methodologies and processes in place, but now you have to add on governance policies, right? And so, again, whole other podcast episode is on AI and technology governance, because you can't just introduce something and not
No.
give any governance direction on, how to effectively and how to ethically use that, and what your organizational stance is um, on that in itself. So
Well,
you got to
the
call
G
that.
word can be the G word can be a dirty word in some organizations. Some people are like,
It
"Oh,
can.
governance, I don't want governance,"
Yeah.
but when you're spinning up a bunch of agents inside of an organization, I don't care if you're doing financial planning and spinning up agents to do financial operational workflows, or you have agents to help read RFPs and spit out proposals. If you don't have strong governance, you're going to end up having a proliferation of agents that are going
Yeah.
unchecked and could
Yes.
potentially do some harm or invoke some risk at this point in time. But I do think that is a component. Yet another layer is having somebody in the COO seat that knows the right type of governance to implement inside the culture so it's not too disruptive, but it has enough risk mitigation built into it. So as AI is being introduced, we're making sure that we're following,
Yeah,
compliance and regulations.
exactly. So this actually dovetails nicely into our last segment here, which is the future of executive leadership. And I think we've kind of touched on it a little bit in our conversation by bringing in some of the other C-suite type of positions. But, SaaS, AI, private equity, they're all kind of shaping how companies kind of operate. Like business as usual is no longer business as usual. It's like they took the playbook, tore it up, and then pulled all the pieces together, and this is kind of what we got. So Rob, what do you see as like the future of fractional leadership roles? Not just the COO, because there's a lot of different C suites out there. Um, what does your future look like here, in that level?
I personally think because technology has advanced and evolved to where it's at, there's a lot more entrance into any market, any industry. AI is that kind of a game changer because now we have the access to the compute power. We can disrupt companies and markets overnight because you have a lot of really creative folks out there that are looking to be disruptors. And
Hmm.
so, with that, you need, I think the fractional role is like I've been going back to this, it's a scaling mechanism. You're bringing in seasoned leadership to come in, and it's kind of like a cloud service. You buy what you use. You don't have to buy it full time. Like it's
Right.
an as a service model. I mean, it kind of is. It's an as a service model to bring in the right level of leadership based upon where you're at in your growth. And with business models getting disruptive with first cloud and now AI, you need that access to that kind of human capital um, to help you with your growth execution, but you're not getting the commitment of
Yeah.
a full-time leadership team, and you have the ability to pivot or change.
Yeah. And I think it's important too, and I think CEOs, founders, presidents, whatever leadership position you want to label it, who makes these type of C hiring decisions, they do it from a very emotional state. And we talked about emotions
Yes.
before. And then they also do it from a very unrealistic, what does the end result look like? What is your goal? And a lot of times people will come to me and say, well, we hired this person and it didn't work out, or they were horrible, or they didn't do this. I was going to go back to, well, what was your main mission and your goals? Were those
Yeah.
clearly articulated? Did you level set expectations? Because a lot of the times it's because you didn't know and you weren't able to give that visionary leadership insight. So, how is someone going to be able to follow you? How is someone, like, no one is ever going to succeed in your eyes? And so, it's a red flag for me when I work with a company and I have a CEO who's like, I brought this person, they sucked. I brought this person, they failed. I brought this person, and it's like, okay, I think maybe you need to take a step back, and maybe it was not them. And some of these individuals I knew because you can't work in this industry for 20 years plus and not come across certain people who are like, I'm gonna
Yep.
run. Like I wouldn't touch them with a 5 foot pole. However, there are some very good people out there that you're like, if you couldn't work with them and you couldn't make this successful, then I think you need to look inward, in exactly what it was and what part you played. So I feel like I'm like a marriage counselor sometimes, like I'm bringing,
100%.
like, and so it's like, okay, marriage counseling time. What was your, like, how culpable were you, in this role? And so I think it is really kind of important to, um, look at, again, we keep bringing back the integrative, management teams and, the emotion. And I think a fractional person is such a logical person to bring in. And I think we need to tell the intellectuals out there, it's okay to swap people from different seats. It's not a failure of them and it's not
It
a
is.
failure of you. It's because you need to meet and you need to be where you are in that process. And so if you've evolved, if you've progressed, you may need a different skill set. You may need someone with a different level of experience, to get to the next part. And so, I have a really good friend, Mehul Sangani. He used to be CEO of Octo Consulting, and he
Oh, he's
came
a
and
Hokie.
spoke. Yes, he's a Hokie. And he used to, he came and spoke at one of my events, and he laid out and talked about how Octo grew. And
Yeah.
so he did mention at one point where he realized at one point he had to change a very key C-suite person because that person wasn't going to be able to take him to where he needed to go. And he did it in a very, like unemotional kind of way. It was just something logical that you have to do at that point. And so being able to kind of have someone like a COO or whoever in your C suite to be able to kind of help guide you and coach you or maybe mentor you through that process, I think is so key.
Yeah, it's in when you're starting up a business or you're running a business, and I'm highly empathetic to owners of companies and um, with the difficulty you have. There's just a lot of obstacles to overcome to have success in this
Yeah.
environment, particularly in government contracting, where it can be overwhelming to a new entrant in particular. You definitely need that. I keep going back to it, sort of that clinical, non emotive advice to help you navigate that because you're going to have people that you're going to have very close relationships with, and you maybe actually be friends with them, and you're going to have to make some hard, tough
Yeah.
decisions at certain points in the game. Because the one thing that is consistent that we've talked about is the company's going to continuously change and evolve no matter what. And so to your point, you need like not just that sounding board of seasoned reason. And someone that can bring in that insight, both internal insight and external insight, but also the ability to adjust. Some of your leadership may need to adjust as you grow and scale.
Yeah. Exactly. And sometimes they're not capable or they don't want to.
Yeah,
So you have to
exactly.
be you have to be willing to see that too. So let's move to our key takeaways here because we've had a tremendous conversation on this topic. And so as we wrap up our episode, a couple takeaways is that fractional leadership offers, I think, executive impact without full-time overhead. Like, let's just be serious. Sometimes you can't carry it. Sometimes you can't afford to. And so it's just the most reasonable approach and process to getting to your end game. Also, COOs, I think, bridge proposal ideas with delivery. They kind of create credibility, the possibility of what could happen in a proposal in a contract, and that federal contracting is really kind of ripe for fractional roles. I think in this climate and environment in general, it applies to both our public and our private sector organizations. And then also the future of the C-suite, I think, needs to be scalable, needs to be flexible, or do I dare say the word agile? I try not to say that in too many conversations, but it's small agile, right? It's not agile with like the big A that I'm talking about. So, but Rob, your last parting thoughts on some key takeaways.
Yeah, I'd say one thing that we haven't really that I haven't really talked about in this conversation, and I'm reminded of, is you put all this sweat equity into going out and winning this proposal and acquiring a new customer, which is incredibly hard, particularly for small, medium sized businesses. If you don't bring in a good fractional leader, particularly from an operational perspective or a delivery perspective, if the execution fails, that's brand integrity. I mean,
Yeah.
you're eroding the very brand that you've spent lots of time, lots of sweat equity in building, and you want to bringing in some of that fractional leadership can really help navigate around some of that risk and help you execute better on the promises that you've made to your new customers that you're trying to acquire and your existing customers, obviously.
Yeah, exactly. And there's your punctuation mark in our podcast episode. So thank you so much for those key takeaways there, Rob. And so this
Yeah,
concludes our episode on fractional COOs. Please subscribe to our podcast and stay tuned for future episodes every Wednesday. Rob, thanks for joining us and sharing your knowledge with us here today.
it was great to see everybody. Great to see you, Ton.
Yeah, you too. It's always good to reconnect. And so, thanks again to our intellectual listeners for joining us here today. And remember, you have to think big to win big. Be an intellectual. And until next time, keep pushing the boundaries of possibilities.